They're always somehow reflecting back to us what we care about. Any kind of American neuroses, any kind of American mythologies, the Kennedy family is like woven into the American story for, over 100 years.
George Civeris is the host of the comedy podcast Straightiolab, as well as a new podcast called The United States of Kennedy that explores our cultural fascination with the Kennedy dynasty and the ways that this family has continued to shape American life for decades. For this episode, George lays out the tale of the Kennedy curse through a handful of tragic stories that have given Americans the impression that this political powerhouse family might have an almost paranormal case of bad luck. I'm your host, Chelsey Weber-Smith, and this is American Hysteria. I am so excited to welcome our guest this week. Hello, George. I can't wait to talk all things Kennedy with you.
Oh my God, I'm so excited. And we're recording during, not to date ourselves, which I know we shouldn't do in a recorded podcast, but we're recording during the RFK Jr. interrogations that are happening, which have been all over my feed. And I will say, I don't know why I even brought it up because I haven't actually done a deep dive into everything that's being said yet, but every 2 minutes I see a clip where he's looking, I'm sorry to say, incredibly unhealthy, talking about how we need to all, detox and make ourselves healthy. But hopefully we can talk about some more photogenic Kennedys today.
Yeah, I hope so, because every time I look at him, he looks more and more like he is melting toward the earth, as if he is being pulled into hell. So it's good. We don't have to go there right now. Yeah. I'm sure we'll have some poignant ending thoughts about him.
Of course.
But he's not who we're talking about today.
No.
So, George, let's get started.
Let's do it.
All right. I think thinking about the Kennedys, it's a big blind spot for me in American history. So this is actually going to be really valuable to my overall understanding of pop politics, maybe I'll say.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think I'm most interested in this Kennedy curse that we hear about. And I know there are many deaths, mysteries that surround this family. So I want to definitely get into that. But to start, I would love if you told us why the Kennedys? Why would you want to make an entire podcast about this family?
Yeah. So my co-host Lyra Smith had this idea and developed it for like a year before I was brought on. She grew up hearing a lot about the Kennedys. She has some like kind of tangential family connections to them, which is something that you slowly realize everyone has. Like everyone has some version of their own Kennedy story. One of the things we do in the beginning of each episode is play very short clips of phone calls where we just call random people up, whether it's friends or listeners or whatever. And we say, what do you think when I say, Chappaquiddick, let's say, as one of the topics. Like each week it's a different topic. And everyone has some connection, whether it's like a formative news clip they remember seeing when they were a kid, whether it's like having a cousin that married someone who was like a relative of Jackie O's. Like they just are, somehow these people are everywhere. I mean, I can give you an example, like Kick, one of RFK Jr.'s daughters, and I'm sorry to keep bringing him up.
It's fine. It's going to happen.
Went to college with me and I didn't overlap with her, but like I know friends who have stories about her and like they lived in the same dorm as her, whatever. I went to a wedding a couple of years ago and it slowly spread throughout the wedding that someone there was married to a Kennedy. And sure enough, I looked over at that table and he had the Kennedy, physiognomy, to use a internet term du jour. So, and he just looked, and he was, from what I remember, he was a doctor, very handsome. Like he was, quote unquote, one of the good ones. He wasn't doing anything evil, but it was just like, there it is, the Kennedy face. Like another sort of example that's more personal to me is, Jackie, after she became widowed, spent a good amount of her like middle years in a relationship with Aristotle Onassis, who is, of course, like this very wealthy Greek shipping tycoon. And my family is Greek. I mostly grew up in Greece.
Wow.
And so I grew up hearing a lot about Jackie's Onassis era. Like Jackie was this big celebrity in Greece. A sort of like fun fact is that the biggest gay club in Mykonos is named Jackie O. So like they're just everywhere. Like the other day, in fact, I was talking about this with Lyra, and then I went to the gym and I saw a gay guy wearing a Jackie O hat, like a Jackie O Mykonos merch hat.
Nice.
So it's one of those things that like once you start thinking about it, you see it everywhere. Like you can't unsee it. And I mean, candidly, I was brought on as a second co-host. It was not my idea. It was not my, it was not like my baby.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason I very enthusiastically said yes is because I saw it as a really fun pop culture way to learn about 20th century American history through this like, I don't know, this lens that combines, you know, kind of like media criticism, because they're also like celebrity figures, and the coverage of the Kennedys very much mirrors American values at any given time. A lens that is very sort of related to different American mythologies, which I know is something that you're very interested in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The Kennedy family is like woven into the American story at this point for, you know, over 100 years.
And I'm sure that that's going to continue, obviously, as we're seeing right now. That's really, no, it's very interesting. And I mean, when I think of JFK, obviously I think of many things, but I really think about how he was, and this isn't an original idea, of course, but he was kind of the first celebrity president.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of brought us to a point where it feels like the only people who can get elected are celebrities, because he wasn't as prepared, let's say, to be president the way that Nixon was. And yet he, you know, blew him away. And even that alone feels like such an important turning point. In this case, one that I preferred at that moment in time, but it is just a really important thing to understand, because we can really understand the present moment and what politics has become by tracing that lineage.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was also, you know, in the same way that you could say Obama was like the first social media. Well, you could also argue that Trump was the first social media president, but like Obama was, you know, utilized Twitter and Facebook in ways that people previously hadn't done. And JFK sort of had that with television. Like there's the famous story, which actually media scholars will tell you is very overblown, but there was a famous story where during the debate with Nixon, the people who watched it on TV thought JFK won, and the people who listened to it thought Nixon won. And that is because Nixon was like sort of sweating and JFK was more handsome and seemed more comfortable. So again, another way in which like the Kennedy family is tied to such a quintessentially American thing as like television celebrity.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's funny, not to jump ahead, but like I've been thinking a lot about Jack Schlossberg, who is JFK's grandson, who's now sort of a social media star, and a sort of warped, bizarro, similar thing is happening with him, but with social media. Like he is, in the same way that his grandfather, you know, was a TV star, he's now becoming an Instagram star.
Yeah. You know what? Since we're talking about it, I want to hear a little bit more about him real quick.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, he's an interesting one. He's full of contradictions, and I'm not sure how much of it is intentional. I think what I like about him, and I don't necessarily think this makes him an amazing spokesperson for the Democratic Party, but what I like about him is that he is really just like a troll at heart. Like he's sort of a shit poster. Like he is always both serious and not serious. He says things that are intentionally provocative. Like he once tweeted, "Who do you think is hotter, Usha Vance or Jackie O?" Who is, again, his grandmother. Like, he obviously that's an intentionally provocative and controversial thing to tweet. He knows it. And then if people ask him about these things and they're like, why do you say things like that? Why do you post like videos where you're like singing shirtless, whatever?
Yeah.
His answer is always, which is so kind of like frustrating, but also savvy. His answer is like, well, you know, Republicans have gotten better at courting controversy than Democrats have. So the work, quote unquote, work I do, I'm doing air quotes, is like in order to get people talking about Democratic causes. And to his credit, he does also post about like voting for Zoran, and he does also,
Sure.
Speak at the DNC. It's not like he's just like sitting home doing nothing. But yeah, I think sometimes the jokes land in a way that's fun or funny or subversive. And sometimes it's truly just someone like throwing spaghetti at the wall.
Yeah, and just trying to gain some traction with saying some shit. Yeah. Now I'm looking at him. I had no idea this person existed. I'm trying to decide if I think that he is or is not cute. What do you think?
I mean, I have to say, I found out about him a few years ago because I don't know, a friend of mine, I also separately host a comedy podcast, and my friend was like, you guys need to get Jack Schlossberg on.
Yeah, I agree.
On this comedy podcast, I was like, I had never heard of him. And then I looked him up and followed him. And now at this point, I've seen so much footage of him that I no longer, like, he doesn't register to me as hot or not.
As anything, yeah.
But in the beginning, I was like, oh, he sort of is like the 21st century version of a hot Kennedy. Like, he's not.
Sure.
I'm trying to put this sensitively. He doesn't have the sort of like crusty, waspy, I guess they're not wasps, we're famously Catholic, but the crusty sort of like white person, Massachusetts thing. And he's a little more, kind of New York fuckboy type attractive.
Yes, I can see that.
Which is so, it's like, of course they're like evolving with the times. Like the two, and that's what's amazing about the Kennedys, like at any given time, they reflect the culture. Right now, the two most famous Kennedys that are alive are RFK Jr., who literally is like reflecting all these incredible American neuroses around vaccines and health and MAGA and the Trump administration, whatever. And then you have Jack Schlossberg, who's reflecting like influencer culture and Instagram and kind of like evolving notions of masculinity, they're always somehow intentionally or not like reflecting back to us what we care about in some way.
God. That's wild. I see exactly what you mean. Okay, so do you think a good place to start would be kind of the patriarch of the Kennedy dynasty? I know very little about him. I did a quick Wikipedia, but other than that, I would love to learn a little bit more about him to get some foundation for all the kids that came.
Yeah, definitely. And we can also go into the curse through him.
Okay, great. All
right, so let's see. Joe Kennedy is the patriarch of the Kennedy family, meaning he is JFK's father and the father of, RFK, aka Bobby, who was JFK's attorney general and then also ran for president and was also assassinated shortly after JFK was. Joe Kennedy is, again, speaking of American mythologies, to me, Joe Kennedy represents like the idea of the American dream. Like he is someone who was at the time in a minority, people forget that to be Irish Catholic, was not always just like another flavor of white person.
No, it was really brutal for a long time. Yeah.
It was, yes. So he made this incredible fortune, was just incredibly ambitious, had his hands in, I don't want to misspeak and like, because I don't have his entire biography in front of me, but he made his fortune in, finance and in business, but then also had his hands in Hollywood, politics. Like he just was a true, Logan Roy level Succession character.
Yeah. Got it.
And he always wanted for his children to carry on his legacy and to infiltrate American politics. One sort of interesting thing about Joe Kennedy that people might not know is, so he did hold a position in politics in his later life. And something incredibly shameful is that during the preamble to World War II, he like openly thought that we should not go to war with Hitler and was sort of like, there's a way to like negotiate with Hitler. Like maybe we can like, he basically, to put it mildly, like wanted to stay neutral as long as possible, to the point where he was like accused of being a Nazi sympathizer.
Right.
And so it's sort of goes to show you how influential the Kennedys have been since, and that's not like the first thing you think about.
No.
But at the time, he was pretty like disgraced after World War II. Anyway, in terms of the curse, there's always been this idea since like the 1940s that there's a curse that surrounds the Kennedy family. And a lot of people know that they have had a lot of freak accidents. There's been a lot of specifically plane accidents and car accidents, a lot of health problems, a lot of drug and addiction issues. just mental illness, physical illness. It's just, tragedy sort of follows them around. And there's this idea, even like this idea that like, let's say someone starts dating a Kennedy. It's like, well, it's a double-edged sword because on the one hand, it's like your ticket to fame and fortune. On the other hand, you're probably going to die at 27.
Right,
it's this kind of thing that people talk about a lot. Lyra, my co-host, has always said, and she sort of has brought me around to this idea, if we're going to start thinking conspiratorially and supernaturally, that the curse started with Rosemary Kennedy. And so for people who might not know, Rosemary Kennedy was one of Joe's daughters, meaning she was one of JFK's siblings. And she always had some mixture of learning disabilities and mental health issues, which I'm sure if she were alive today, we would have a better language for. But at the time, it was like, she's the problem child. She's struggling in school. We're trying to send her to like a monastery and she's having trouble with the nuns. Like, it was always like, what do we do with Rosemary?
Yeah.
She was also, according to her parents, like in her teenage years, promiscuous, which was seen as something that was very bad for the family, for her to have this reputation. Long story short, her father, in secret from a lot of the family, had her lobotomized. Which is obviously this incredibly cruel and evil thing to do to your own daughter. Depending on who you ask, the science at the time was such that one could be convinced that this was an experimental treatment for mental illness. It's not that he was trying to harm her as much as he did potentially.
Yeah, and it was a lot more common. I mean, it was just a common thing back then. It doesn't make it at all right, but it is something that a lot of people were doing. So he didn't go out of his way to do something totally batshit, maybe by today's standards. Yeah.
I will say though, the fact that he kept it hidden from everyone sort of like points to him knowing it wasn't, what everyone wanted and what everyone would have approved.
No, that's a very good point.
The point is she was mostly incapacitated after that and was institutionalized for most of her life. In her later years, the family kind of got more involved again and she was around more loved ones in her later years. But, she lived this very tragic life and it was because her father did this to her.
Yeah. And
it is sort of one of the great shames of the Kennedy family, like as they're all running for office and trying to sell this image that they're this family that believes in progress and is going to lead America forward. They have this incredibly dark secret sort of hiding in their closet. So
kind of literally. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
More after this. And now back to the show.
So that to me is for lack of a better word, like a nice place to start with the curse.
Sure, yeah.
And then it just sort of is off to the races. I mean, Joe Jr., who was supposed to be the chosen one, he was the one that Joe Kennedy wanted to be the big star of the family, was killed during World War II in an explosion while on a plane. Then shortly after, Kick Kennedy, her name is Kathleen, but the family called her Kick.
Was it like Kick?
Yes.
That's kind of cute.
Which is a family name. And in fact, what they also, RFK Jr.'s daughter, the one that I overlapped with in college briefly, also goes by Kick.
Okay.
So Kick Kennedy's husband, Billy, was also killed in the war only 4 months later. Afterwards, Kick, after he died, fell in love with someone else and something tragic happened to him. Then of course, JFK was famously assassinated in Dallas, very shortly thereafter. Bobby, who was JFK's attorney general and then was considered the last hope for the Democrats, was assassinated in 1968. And then you can sort of take that and run with it. I mean, just very quick examples off the top of my head, like RFK Jr.'s previous wife committed suicide. Right. There were a lot of addiction issues. A lot of people died very young of drugs. A sort of obvious one is JFK Jr., who was JFK's son and sort of this real People magazine's hottest man alive in the 90s.
Sure.
The most sought after bachelor in New York City. He dated Sarah Jessica Parker. He dated Daryl Hannah.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. He dated Madonna, I believe, briefly. JFK Jr. in 1999 died in a very tragic plane crash along with Carolyn Bessette, his wife, and her sister, Lauren. Oh, to go back a little bit, another huge tragedy, which was also, in fact, the first time the Kennedys themselves mentioned the idea of a Kennedy curse, was the car crash in Chappaquiddick Island. So Chappaquiddick Island is an island off the coast of Martha's Vineyard where Ted Kennedy, after a party with a bunch of women called the Boiler Room Girls who used to work for Bobby Kennedy, they were having a sort of reunion party. It was like a celebratory environment. And, by all accounts, he was drinking. He and Mary Jo Kopechne, who was one of these women, were in a car, and he drove off of a bridge into a lake. And, we can talk about the details later and how much he was at fault.
Sure.
Separate from obviously the drunk driving, which is not good.
Yes.
The point is, he left the car after it was submerged and left her there and did not call the police in time for her to be saved.
Right.
And so what's interesting about that is it is an instance where he is very clearly at fault. It's not like fate brought bad luck onto the Kennedys. It's that he was drinking and driving and recklessly killed a woman. But what happened was he gave this press conference about it, and he was especially worried about his public image even more than any person would be that was involved in something like this, because he had aspirations of running for president. And what he said was something along the lines of, it makes you wonder if there really is a curse that surrounds our family, which is so, in my opinion, kind of dishonest and manipulative, because it is using this idea of a curse that previously was used to talk about freak accidents and disease and health issues, and turn it around to make himself the victim, even though he was, in this specific instance, clearly at fault in terms of what happened.
That's really, I have never heard that use of the Kennedy curse. That makes so much sense as a way to, use something like that. Yeah.
And it's famously the first mention of the curse by a Kennedy.
So the first acknowledgement that people talk about that kind of,
Yes, the first public acknowledgement that it's something that is in the air. And it's interesting, Ted was in an interesting place at the time because, Joe Jr., as I said, was the one that was supposed to be the golden child. He died. Then JFK did it. He did the thing. He became president. Then he was assassinated. Bobby, who was sort of the brainy one, was also assassinated. Ted was just the last one left.
Yeah.
No one in the family, from what I understand, ever believed Ted was going to be the one to be carrying the baton for the family, but he was the one left. And there was a lot of goodwill. I mean, he was popular in Massachusetts. He was already a senator. What's interesting about Ted, and I know that we're getting a little bit kind of in a tangent, but all else aside, Ted, in fact, then was reelected and was, I think, the fourth longest running senator in American history.
Wow.
So after all of that, he actually had the longest and most consequential career in public service of all the siblings, even though he was sort of the random one,
A little bit of the runt. Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you have any idea how, was he actually good at politics, or was it just that he had the Kennedy name?
Ted, you mean?
Yeah, Ted.
I just think, I think that he was popular in Massachusetts. And I think that from what I understand, and I really don't have his record in front of me, but I think he was a good senator when it comes to just getting things done and being a kind of good, relatively centrist Massachusetts Democrat.
Sure. Yeah. Uh-huh.
He cared about education. He cared about boilerplate kitchen table issues. I wish I had off the top of my head his signature legislation or something, but I think he just was popular. And so he kept being reelected. And I think what Chappaquiddick did is kill his dreams of becoming president. I mean, that was never going to happen. And in 1980, when he eventually did run, he lost. He did not win the primary. But I think, people have short memories, and and also he did have a lot of goodwill. And that press conference he gave, sure, it didn't convince the entire country that he should be president, but I do think it convinced people that he in some way was the victim of bad luck, and everyone makes mistakes, and he was, this was a tragedy rather than a murder,
Right.
And so I think people, quote unquote, forgave him in some way.
Sure. And so I would actually love to know almost a beat by beat of what happened at Chappaquiddick, because I really only know the version that I feel like they did on Succession, which is not really congruent. But I know that that's probably the influence that came into that scene.
I'm glad that you even know that reference, because what I was about to say is I thought everyone knew about that, and then I've realized that they don't. But in fact, I want to put myself in that camp as well. I didn't know about it until someone explained it to me. I didn't know that that was what Succession was referencing.
Yeah, I didn't either.
And for anyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about, like, there is a famous sequence early on, I believe it's in the end of the first season, where Kendall Roy in Succession gets into an accident where I believe a waiter at that party is killed or something.
It was like somebody who's buying drugs from, I think, right?
Yes. Right. Yes. I think it's someone he's buying drugs from. And then he, of course, goes to great lengths to bury that story. So what happened to Chappaquiddick is, as I said, I believe Ted Kennedy and various other people were in Martha's Vineyard for a regatta that they went to every year. It was very sort of, it's very Massachusetts, it's very Cape Cod, it's that kind of sailing, moneyed vibe. And they were having this party along with, as I mentioned, these women who worked for Bobby Kennedy and were very close to the Kennedy family. And Mary Jo Kopechne was one of them. And she was, I believe, an especially bright young political consultant. I think at the time she was back in New Jersey where she was from and working on a campaign there. And I think, in a sense, the idealism of the Kennedys died with Bobby. He was like the last truly inspirational figure in that way. And I think she felt very connected to him and very connected to the family. And so it was like I said, it was a celebratory, but also kind of sad mood because, of course, Bobby had died. And Ted got into a car with Mary Jo. They were driving. There was a bridge and there was a paved road that went into the bridge. And then there was an unpaved road that was sort of bumpy. And they went into the unpaved road, took a wrong turn, and basically just like drove into the lake.
Okay. So they didn't drive off a bridge. It was more like they drove into the lake from a road.
It's like, it's sort of like in the beginning of the bridge, he drove off.
Okay, great.
It wasn't like he was in the middle of the bridge and then drove off.
Okay.
From what I remember.
Okay, that makes sense. I can see it.
On their way, there was a police officer that saw them who later became an eyewitness and was like, at this specific time, I saw them pass this junction. And that became like one of the talking points of people that were questioning the official narrative. And then later on, people that were going even deeper into conspiracy theories about what happened, whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
There was two important details. One is that Ted Kennedy did not report it to the police until the morning after. So he let, I believe, 9 hours pass between...
That's so wild.
Crazy. Yeah. Between when he left the car and when he reported it to the police. Obviously, it might be 7 hours. I don't remember the exact details, but it was...
Any hours.
It was very much like it happened at night and he reported it in the morning. Like he did not get out and immediately report it. And then the second important detail is that it is believed that Mary Jo maybe didn't drown, but instead suffocated because there was an air bubble. As she was submerged, there was an air bubble between her face and the top of the car. So she was able to breathe for a limited period of time and then suffocated. And the reason that is important is because that means that if he had reported it earlier, she could have potentially been saved because she didn't drown immediately, if that makes sense. So she was... Again, there are obviously conflicting accounts of this. But,
and it's hard to know what happened when, no one was in the car.
Exactly. It's hard to know what happened when. There was never an autopsy, which is insane. That's for a variety of reasons. One of them, I believe, it's complicated because on the one hand, there's all these conspiracies about how it was a cover-up. On the other hand, her family also didn't want it to go on for the whole thing to go on longer than it needed to because they were in mourning. There are many reasons why it ended up being sort of like pushed under the rug with a bow on it and like forgotten about.
Right.
Obviously, one of them is the Kennedy machine and the fact that they were all worried about Ted's political future, but it's not the only one. But the point is that one of the main narratives around Chappaquiddick is that Ted Kennedy had two sins. One was the actual driving of the car under the influence and also off of the bridge. And the other one was not reporting it to the police, and he could have potentially saved her if he had done that earlier.
Right.
So that, in classic Kennedy fashion, there's just enough like uncertainty that it almost invites conspiracy thinking.
I was going to say that same thing. I was going to say, like, when there's no autopsy, there are going to be conspiracy theories.
I mean, it's exactly like not exactly like it's similar to JFK's assassination, where like if you start reading about it, you're like, surely there's something they're not telling us.
Right. Yeah.
And I think probably the answer is something slightly more mundane than, the craziest conspiracy theories about how like the CIA and the FBI were like colluding with foreign powers to assassinate the president because he wanted to end the war in Vietnam or something. Like, I don't think it's that crazy, but I do think there's something we don't know.
Right. And the conspiracy of Chappaquiddick is that powerful men or men in pursuit of power, women too, I don't mean just men, but, people in pursuit of power will cover up their crimes, and there is a conspiracy of silence around that, but it's pretty simple. It doesn't have to involve anyone other than the person themselves making that decision and the fallout from that decision. Not to say that there isn't other mechanisms happening behind the scenes. I have no idea, but conspiracies happen. They're just usually a lot more boring than we make them.
Of course. And it's also like, I'm sure there are conspiracy theories around like him doing it all on purpose, or Mary Jo Kopechne knowing something and them wanting to kill her. I don't think that's true.
Right.
Like, I do think it was legitimately an accident, which, by the way, one of the patterns with all of this Kennedy curse stuff is, yes, there are a bunch of freak accidents, but the Kennedys are also reckless. Like, JFK Jr.'s plane crashed because he decided to pilot it after being warned many times that the weather conditions were terrible and that he was not equipped to do so.
Okay.
Considering the training that he had at that time. Like, obviously it is a tragedy that the plane crashed, but there is these repeated stories of like them almost thinking that they are above the laws of nature and thinking that they can do things other people can't do. And those things lead to these tragedies. There's a sort of like, there are two sides of the same coin. Like the sort of courage that the Kennedys are known for. The other side of that is like recklessness. Like, it is this sort of like, we can just do anything. Like, we're special.
We have like some kind of halo of protection around us.
Exactly.
No, that makes sense. The recklessness does make a lot of sense. And a curse. Yeah. What really is a curse? It's a really interesting angle there. Okay. So we talked a little bit about the conspiracy theories around Chappaquiddick. Are there any other ones that feel important to talk about?
I mean, you can sort of like see, even based on the things I've mentioned so far, how all of them could lead to conspiracy theories. I mean, think about Rosemary's lobotomy. Like, you can spin that in so many different ways. Like,
she knew too much.
Exactly. It's like suddenly they decided to lobotomize one of the kids and they didn't tell the rest of the family, or maybe they did and they all pretended they didn't know, whatever. Then you get to JFK's assassination, obviously one of the most famous conspiracies in American history writ large.
Probably the most famous, I'd say.
We watched Oliver Stone's JFK movie for the podcast, which I don't know if you've ever seen. It is an insane document because it is, first of all, it's an incredible movie just on a craft level. Like, great performances, great direction. You have to give it to him.
Sure.
But it is fully endorsing like the most psychotic conspiracy theory. It is like a movie about how the entire assassination of JFK was like orchestrated by all these shadowy figures, including the FBI and the CIA. And there's so many, explainers about it on, various more reputable journalistic outlets that explain beat by beat what is incorrect about it. But I mean, I think that's the biggest one. So big, in fact, that it was literally the basis for a movie that was nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars.
Best Picture?
Yeah.
Wow. What year was that ish?
I believe it was in the 90s. Let me see.
I wonder just how much influence that had. Yeah.
It was 91.
That's so early.
Oh my God. It was literally what popularized that conspiracy theory widely in America.
Wow.
I believe. Like, I think, because the thing is, if something like that came out now, there's enough context to be like, okay, well, that's the famous conspiracy. But at the time, it wasn't as much like in the public discourse. So people were like, whoa, like, this sounds like it could be it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
There's actually a great podcast episode. God, I wish I remember the podcast. But if you look up JFK Noam Chomsky on your podcast app, there's a great interview with him where he like goes through how the JFK assassination conspiracy, even though it sort of purports to be anti-establishment in some way, is this weird liberal fantasy that JFK himself is some renegade president who was going to like bring peace. And that's why the FBI and CIA wanted to kill him. When in fact, he was like a completely normal centric, like he was not planning on leaving Vietnam. The Bay of Pigs was a disaster. Like he wasn't some, you know, liberation figure that the deep state wanted to kill.
Sure. It is an attractive narrative, though, for sure. Yeah.
Very much so.
So you have mentioned, obviously, what happened to JFK Jr. and the plane crash and the recklessness. But I also know that there is a lot to his life before that happened. He was a huge figure in 90s New York. So do you want to like paint that scene for us?
Yes. This is the pop culture lens of the Kennedys that I personally like the most. I mean, obviously, I also, you know, it's like the serious stuff is interesting just in terms of knowing your history. Like, obviously, I care about JFK's presidency and I care about, you know, for example, Bobby Kennedy taking on the mafia. That was like a big storyline during that time. And that was, I would say, one of the more actually commendable things that the Kennedys did in politics. I think Kennedy's approach to civil rights and racial equality is interesting because there are moments where he portrays some level of bravery and moments where he's a complete coward. Like all of that is very interesting just in terms of like knowing your history.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, you know, as someone who like grew up watching Sex and the City, of course, I love thinking about, you know, JFK Jr. and all these celebrities he dated in the 90s and him just like waltzing around, actually biking and I believe rollerblading around New York.
Okay,
in
cool.
like these flawless, you know, cool looks that are now on all these like archival Instagrams. And maybe this is just me that's being fed this because I have to do all this research about the Kennedys, but it's like,
I'll be getting it now.
You don't understand how many photos I have to see of JFK Jr. in a blazer and jeans and Carolyn Bessette wearing like a crisp white shirt and like mugging at the camera. So, and you know, my husband is from New York and his family still lives there. I used to work in media, so that world is very interesting to me. JFK Jr. Ran a magazine for a period of time. So it is this time that I really find very romantic because it is the pop culture I grew up with.
Yeah.
So long story short, JFK Jr. was someone who America fell in love with super early on because there's famous news footage of him basically as a little kid. I think he was 3 years old, waving goodbye to his father as he was being wheeled away in a casket.
Oh, yes. I know that photo. Yeah.
Right. So people saw that, and this was like just the sweetest looking little boy, and his father had been murdered. And people watched him grow up in the same way, you know, very similarly to Princess Diana's sons, who everyone felt very protective of as they were growing up.
Yeah, that's what it reminded me of immediately.
Yeah.
Was Harry and William.
Totally. And both protective of and also gawking at, like, and also sort of like obsessed with in like a kind of dark tabloid like way.
Of course.
So anyway, as he was growing up, every move of his was sort of covered in the press. He did what he was supposed to do, which is go to Harvard, go to law school. And then he had various sort of chapters to his adult life. So he very famously failed the bar twice. And that was like a big like New York Post story. They love to just like call him like a dumb hunk and like he didn't know what he was doing. And he was just like a stupid idiot, you know, sort of privileged and aimless. And like all he knows how to do is party and all this stuff. He, as I said, dated all these famous celebrities. He dated Madonna. He dated Sarah Jessica Parker. There was a quote from Sarah Jessica Parker that was so interesting to me where she was like, I've had to deal with media attention in my life as an actress, but I've never had to deal with what I dealt with during the period I dated JFK Jr. Wow. Like that was the level of scrutiny.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like, it was before paparazzi culture was as mainstream as it was like in the early 2000s during the sort of like Lindsay Lohan, Paris Hilton era. Mm-hmm. It really was this sort of new thing. Like everywhere he went, he was photographed. So he dated, as I said, Madonna. Daryl Hannah, I think, was the most serious relationship he had with like a famous celebrity. But then he ended up settling down with Carolyn Bessette. And Carolyn was different than all the other women. She was not a celebrity. She had started...
These pictures of him I'm looking at are so good.
I mean, he is...
Yeah.
He is incredibly handsome. The thing is, like, everyone always talks about the Kennedys being handsome. And actually, when you look at photos of JFK, he looks sort of weird looking. Like, maybe at the time, obviously, he's more handsome than like Richard Nixon, but he's not some heartthrob. Whereas JFK Jr. really is the one where you're like, okay, they perfected the equation and this is the perfect Kennedy face.
This is
like,
the perfect
this is what
face,
they're, it's all been leading to this. Like,
it's the platonic.
He really is. He's just like he looks like a Disney prince, you know, combined with Brad Pitt. Like, it's
crazy.
it really makes sense that like this is the person people would gravitate towards.
Yeah.
So Carolyn started as like a publicist or assistant or something at Calvin Klein. And then she also was working in their like VIP program. So I think they met when JFK Jr. went in for a fitting and she was like the one helping him with a suit. She, by all counts, was incredibly magnetic and beautiful in person. And Calvin Klein himself, like, plucked her out of working in some, like, mall Calvin Klein store and was like, you need to be, you know, front facing. Like, you need to be
the American dream.
Dealing with clients, with like VIP clients directly. Yes, exactly. She was the object of fascination when she was dating JFK Jr. in both positive and negative ways. I think positively, she did develop this reputation as like a fashion icon. I mean, and this happened a little more after her death, but like the look that we now associate with sort of like quiet luxury, let's say, you know, it's like a crisp white shirt and perfectly fitted jeans and like a blonde locks that look effortless, but somehow perfect. Mm-hmm. You know, she wore a lot of American designers. She wore some like Japanese designers. Like she was just very chic, I guess would be the word.
Yeah, very kind of understated elegance is what I'm going to say. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yes. Understated elegance, never cracked a smile, was very mysterious. There's one of the things I learned when we were doing this research is that there's like, I believe like 15 seconds of her speaking total.
Oh my God.
Like captured on tape.
Wow.
Like she never gave an interview. It's like one video of her at some red carpet and then another video where someone asks her a question or something. And you can go on YouTube and search like Carolyn Bessette footage or something.
It's kind of like a true it girl.
Yes. She really was like an it girl of 90s New York.
Which is the best place to be an it girl. I mean,
yeah,
it's like the it girl of it girls.
Exactly. The episode we did on Carolyn, our guest was Glynis McNichol, who is this wonderful culture reporter who has written a lot about Carolyn. She wrote an article about her for Town and Country a few years ago. And she was talking about how like there were all these it girls in the 90s. It was like Gwyneth, Carolyn, and one more who's of course now escaping me. And they each sort of, you know, you gravitated towards each one based on your, you know, your values or like the kind of taste you wanted to, you know, project onto the world. Anyway, so on the one hand, she was this fashion icon. She was beautiful. She was stunning. On the other hand, people, because she was so mysterious, projected so much negativity onto her. Mm-hmm. She's a coke addict. She's a jealous girlfriend. She's, you know, controlling, conniving. She only wants JFK for the glamour and for the money and for the fame. By all counts, she actually was very uncomfortable with the media attention. And there was also all this writing about how she's actually alone in the apartment all day and never leaves the house and is like alone doing cocaine in the apartment all day by herself. You know, who knows what parts of this are true, but it's
the best way to do cocaine all day alone in your house. Uh-huh.
Right, exactly. Just by yourself in the middle of the day. So anyway, that was sort of where they were. And they had this beautiful wedding that was like on a remote island and only family came, and she wore this stunning dress. Like if you've ever seen like a bride wear a very simple, like sort of slip dress, that's where that's from. Like she was,
I'm looking at it right now. Yeah.
You know, it's like that's like the chic thing to do if you're a chic bride. Like at the time, no one would have worn that. People would wear like, you know, big 80s dresses.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I guess I should say about JFK Jr., another huge part of his life and his career is that he started this magazine called George Magazine. And it was, you know, in his telling and in the telling of people who romanticize that period, like the first magazine to combine pop culture and politics and like put politics front and center. So like the first cover was Cindy Crawford dressed as George Washington.
Wow.
And there's actually this great story about how when they were doing the photo shoot, they actually gave her a sock to stuff in her pants to have a bulge as like a visual gag. And then afterwards, Jack was like, we can't have that. And they ended up like photoshopping it out.
That's too bad.
But that's like the level of cheekiness we're talking about. You know, it's like there's a story about how he wanted Madonna to dress as Marilyn Monroe, which is especially provocative because, of course, there's a rumor that his dad had an affair with Marilyn Monroe. And then they ended up, I think, getting Drew Barrymore to do it. Like the visual aesthetics, at least, were a combination of like Vanity Fair and, you know, Mad Magazine or something. Like
sure.
It was very like cheeky and kind of irreverent. I will say the writing didn't make as much of a splash. I think the covers and his editor's letters and stuff were sort of buzzy. It's funny, we did an episode about it and we learned that all these people that now are very much in the culture were like contributing writers or editors. So a fun fact is that Kellyanne Conway had a column on George Magazine as like one of their token conservative voices. Just like sort of random things like that. So anyway, that was another thing he did. The magazine had been running for a couple of years when he died. You know, obviously people love to speculate what he would have eventually done with his life, if he would have gone into politics, if he would have stayed in magazines and media and become like the next Graydon Carter. Who knows? So the plane crash happened in 1999. Like I said, they were going to Hyannisport for Rory Kennedy's wedding. The person that was supposed to pick them up obviously was waiting for them and they never arrived. Are you at all a Real Housewives person? I promise that this is leading somewhere.
I've always wanted to be, but it's felt impenetrable.
Okay, that is totally fair. I have very spotty knowledge of it. The only reason I'm asking is because some of your listeners who might watch The Real Housewives of New York might know Carol Radswell, who is one of the New York housewives. In a sort of very funny instance of the Kennedys always being related to pop culture no matter what time period, Carol Radswell, who was married to JFK Jr.'s cousin, was the one that ended up figuring out that the plane had, like, she was the one who started making calls when she was told that they were missing, figuring out that the plane had crashed, calling the Coast Guard, all this stuff, and eventually calling Carolyn Bissett's parents and breaking the news to them.
Whoa.
So she was married to Lee Radswell, which is like, you know, no need to get into the Kennedy connection there, but he then ended up dying of cancer. She wrote a memoir about it called What Remains. It became this huge bestseller. Then that led to her becoming sort of a, you know, kind of buzzy writer / socialite. Fast forward to Andy Cohen meets her at a party and asks her to be a Real Housewives of New York. Of course, he's incredibly charmed by the fact that she has Kennedy connections because that's like exactly what you want out of a Real Housewife of New York. The Kennedys are discussed a lot within the Real Housewives franchise. There's an amazing moment where Sonia Morgan, who's one of the other housewives, is drunk and she goes, "I used to party with John John." And then Carol tells her, you know, people who knew him never called him John John.
Ooh, really good.
Which, you know, is a great,
really good line.
So anyway, that's neither here nor there. But it's further proof that, as I was saying in the very beginning, like they're just everywhere. You can't escape them.
Ubiquitous.
You can be watching Bravo and it's like, there they are.
Wow. Okay. I love that. So I don't know how much detail is important with what happened with the plane crash, but do you want to kind of continue with that?
I mean, that's pretty much it. You know, it was another instance of this sort of recklessness. I mean, I think one of the reasons people want to believe in a Kennedy curse or want to believe there's significance, there's some sort of like higher supernatural significance of the Kennedy family is because it's difficult to look at something like this. Like, think about this, like, little boy that America loved, who grew up to be America's sexiest man, who then, you know, had this incredible life and was New York's most eligible bachelor. And then he also dies tragically in a plane crash. I mean, it just is so cinematic that it begs to be overinterpreted in this way.
Totally.
And even like, you think about someone like Carolyn Bessette, it's like, she also then became this huge icon among a certain set of, you know, kind of Carrie Bradshaw-esque girls. A lot of people say, so the Row, which is the Olsen twins fashion line.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah.
Yes. So if you look at their clothes, you know, a lot of people will tell you they are like directly inspired by the sort of Carolyn Bessette like aesthetic.
I can see that
like
completely.
it's so, you know, the point is these things just like come and go. And I mean, JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette are especially relevant now because Ryan Murphy is literally in the process of filming a show about them.
Oh, Ooh, of course he is.
Yeah, which I don't know if you at all kept up with the controversy where they released photos of the actress Sarah Pidgeon as Carolyn Bessette, and there was such an uproar on the internet because her clothes and hair were wrong that they literally fired the costume
stylist
people
or something. Yeah.
And started over.
Wow.
So people really have strong opinions about these things.
Well, I mean, I guess that's an important thing to nail, but
yeah,
I'm sure he wasn't nice about it.
Well, listen, if you have a total of 9 seconds of her speaking, all we have is her fashion.
True.
So you better get that part right at least.
It's got to speak. Yeah. Okay. So in the wake of this, tragic plane accident, were there a lot of conspiracy theories that cropped up immediately? Were people talking a lot about the Kennedy curse in the media?
Definitely people talking about the Kennedy curse.
Yeah.
I don't know of any conspiracy theories. I'm sure they exist.
I'm sure they're out there. Yeah.
But I think it was more, I think what happened was the Kennedy curse hadn't been front and center for a while. I mean, if you look at the 60s through the 70s, it was very top of mind, especially post JFK's assassination. Yeah. And then, the world had sort of moved on. And I think the plane crash was just so operatically tragic because it was these very young people, including Carolyn's sister, which I think that really reignited the narrative about the Kennedy curse.
Yeah. How could it not? More after this. And now back to the show.
It's funny, you'll find these timelines of the Kennedy curse, and some of them are a bit of a stretch. I'm seeing here, in 2011, Kara Kennedy died of a heart attack at age 51 while at the gym.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's very tragic. Many people die of a heart attack at the gym. You hear of people getting cancer. I mean, Jackie O died of cancer at a, relatively young age. She wasn't 97, but people get cancer, so it's kind of off the top of my head, a recent one in 2019, one of the Kennedy grandkids, great-great-grandkids, whatever, I think her name was Saoirse Kennedy, died of an overdose at the Kennedy compound, and she was only 22. And that is obviously especially tragic and not something that happens every day. I would say another one which I mentioned earlier, is RFK Jr.'s wife before Cheryl Hines committed suicide. Obviously very tragic. And by the way, I think a lot of Kennedy fans, for lack of a better word, or sort of Kennedy obsessives look at someone like Jack Schlossberg and have their antennae on, and they're like, uh-oh, he's acting erratic.
Yeah.
He's unstable. Something bad is going to happen to him. They're on guard for whatever. Yes, exactly. For whatever the next thing will be. And I think that is definitely part of the obsession with him. Jack does this thing where he will reference Kennedy lore.
Oh, I'm sure.
In his videos. I wouldn't say he's directly joked about plane crashes, but he had one video where he was talking about how funny it is when flight attendants say, "Have a safe flight," as though it's a directive, as though it's in any way in your, sure. in your control, which I thought was sort of a risky thing to joke about considering his family's history. He obviously jokes about his mom, whatever. So yes, I think people are always on guard. I mean, obviously, depending on your politics, the fact that RFK Jr. has this huge position in the Trump administration and is rolling back scientific research and, promoting medical disinformation is also something that's not good for America. So you could argue that's part of the curse. It's sort of an expansive definition.
Yeah, the curse is we are now cursed by
Yes,
Kennedy.
Exactly. We are now cursed.
He's taken it back, taking the power back.
Exactly.
And cursing America. And I think that when we talk about conspiracy theories and when we talk about, I wouldn't necessarily call the curse a conspiracy theory, but maybe a paranormal interpretation. Yeah. People are always going to be looking at the evidence that supports their belief. So they're going to say, wow, look at this number of Kennedys where these things have happened, and then ignore the many, 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 many other Kennedys that have had normal deaths, and including people who have died young from cancer. That doesn't feel,
Absolutely.
I don't know how curses operate. I'm not an expert.
Well, the other thing is if we're looking at the data, they are extremely wealthy family full of sort of adventure seekers.
Yeah, right.
Sorry, but any super wealthy family is unfortunately going to have issues with addiction, issues with, accidents related to like travel and extreme sports. Like it sort of comes with the territory, not to stereotype, but they are Irish Catholic. And so there's, the drinking is sort of part of their culture, especially in the 50s and 60s, So there is context to all of this is what I'm saying.
Right.
And also all families have tragedy. Not all of them are reported on in the news. Like I could find instances of incredibly tragic things that have happened in my family and to my family members, but I've never sat down to make a timeline of when each one happened to determine whether they were like out of the ordinary.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we could all do the same thing.
Yeah.
And I think that with hyper wealthy, powerful families, there is, as mentioned before, like a halo of protection idea. So like you take risks, you get to take these bigger risks because you're maybe in a private plane all the time. And those are, infamously less safe. But then you're also going to drive drunk, really drunk. I'm not going to fly off this bridge because I'm a Kennedy.
Right.
So do you have any like belief in curses? This is just like a right turn here, but what if you were gonna, do you have any?
I know, it's funny. I really don't. I wish, like many people in our sort of generation milieu, like I went through a very like militant sort of like atheist phase when I was like
me too.
a teen. Then I sort of got over it and I was like, who cares? Like anyone can believe whatever they want to believe. I did not grow up in a super oppressive religious environment. My parents are Greek Orthodox. We like went to church for Easter. So I didn't have like trauma associated with it. It was more like an intellectual, like, you guys are all believing a lie, whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm sort of neutral about things like spirituality. And I kind of think if you're not harming anyone, you can believe whatever you want to believe. I personally, I don't know. I don't find it interesting as much as some people do to like ask questions I inherently don't know the answers to, which sounds almost like I hate mystery or something, and I'm like a curmudgeon and whatever. It's like when people ask you, do you think there's an afterlife? I'm like, I know that I don't have the answer to that, so why would I spend like a second thinking about it? Like it just isn't interesting to me.
And that you won't be able to, right? Like maybe if you could get to an answer, then you might be more interested in it. But if it's the afterlife, I mean, unless, we're the first ones to ever know, then it's just not going to happen.
What I do believe, and of course, now I'm going to contradict everything I've said so far. What I do believe is like, to use an overused word right now, like there is such a thing as vibes. Like some people have bad vibes. Some people have good vibes. Some people do have a charisma that takes over the room. We've interviewed a lot of people for the podcast that have met different Kennedys. We've interviewed people that met JFK Jr. and Carolyn. We interviewed someone who went to high school with JFK Jr. All of them do describe this experience of him or his, cousins or siblings, like entering a room and something shifts in the room.
Sure. Yeah, I understand.
And I don't think that's supernatural. I think that is like something that has been fostered over generations. I think they have power in American culture. And I think that is meaningful. I mean, it's funny, before I was talking about the Kennedys that currently are the most famous, and I mentioned Jack Schlossberg and RFK Jr., another one is Patrick Schwarzenegger, who was just in The White Lotus. Like Maria Shriver, his mother is Eunice Kennedy's daughter. She married Arnold Schwarzenegger, which talk about an incredible like marriage of two kind of American pop culture icons, like a Kennedy and then like one of the biggest kind of sports, entertainment, and politics stars in American history. So Patrick Schwarzenegger again somehow is now like in his own way sort of a heartthrob that is magnetic and charismatic on screen. So I don't know if I believe in a curse. I believe that they have a strong magnetic charge to them.
Yeah.
Which is why honestly I think it's one of my sort of almost like inside jokes with myself during all of this is I always find it funny when there are Kennedys who are flops. Like there are certain Kennedys who aren't charismatic and they're the exception to the rule.
Okay.
Like there's Joe Kennedy III, I believe his name is. He's 44 years old. He definitely has the Kennedy face. He was a politician in Massachusetts. There was a point where they were trying to sort of promote him to be, a sort of Obama-like figure. And it just like didn't work for him. He just like didn't have it. And I think that goes to show you what the power of the Kennedys is, which is like the exception is the one that isn't presidential.
Right.
You know
right,
what I mean?
Right. Yep. And then not to go off on this tangent, but I did remember that Taylor Swift dated a Kennedy.
Right.
What was that? Connor Kennedy,
yes,
which
Connor.
is that name is very of the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. So Connor Kennedy, of course, now I'm like trying to remember. He's RFK Jr.'s son, which is sort of funny to think about.
Yeah.
Where RFK Jr. is now. Like, I mean, in a world where that relationship lasted, it would be so crazy for Taylor Swift to now be directly implicated in the Trump administration.
Yep.
So I do think she dodged a bullet there. But yes, the Taylor Swift connection is funny. She has a documented obsession with the Kennedys during sort of like 2011, 2012. So she was pretty young. She gave an interview where she talked about how she watched this docuseries about the Kennedys and then read this like really big tome about Kennedy history and became obsessed with them. She wrote a song that like referenced Eunice Kennedy or something. I'm sure there are Swifties that are fact checking me, and I'm sorry.
They're screaming. Yeah.
I know. So very briefly, she was invited to the Kennedy compound. Very briefly, this was like maybe 2 months total. She dated Connor Kennedy. There were a lot of sort of funny controversies. Like I believe, oh God, I don't want to get this wrong. I believe his mother died during that time. And then they went to her gravestone and there were accusations that Taylor Swift called the paparazzi to to see her put flowers down. You know, oh, the other thing is she bought a house across the street from their house. And so people were like, oh my God, she's a stalker. She wants to be a Kennedy so badly that she's buying a house there. Of course, later, one of the Kennedys was like, no, in fact, we were like hanging out socially and someone mentioned it would be a good investment property. And she like, of course, is very rich. So she's buying investment property. So it wasn't a big deal. You know, who knows?
Yeah.
So yes, the Taylor Swift Connor Kennedy connection is a funny one and is another example, much like the Real Housewives thing, of the Kennedys somehow, and of Arnold Schwarzenegger, somehow being connected to every like major pop cultural figure.
Yeah.
It's like even the White Lotus thing. It's like, okay, so there's a Kennedy in the biggest show on HBO.
Yeah.
They have their paws everywhere.
And I mean, the Taylor Swift thing is a perfect example of like two waves crashing into each other of conspiratorial
absolutely
fandom.
Yes.
And it's when was that? They were like, it was
was 2012, I believe. 2011, 2012. It was if I were to guess, I would say summer 2011, but don't quote me on that.
All right. Okay. So, now we have RFK Jr., obviously, as we've mentioned, sending the Kennedy curse out to every living American. Do we think that the curse will continue with RFK, or is he killing the curse by becoming a very different kind of Kennedy? Because wouldn't you say he's a very different kind of Kennedy? He's such a weird character because he wasn't a Republican. He wasn't a conservative. He just kind of like kowtowed to them and just decided that this was the best or maybe the only route to political power for him. I don't know. I'm just thinking about how weird it is that he is the kind of end of the line right now for us. He is the reflection that we are seeing every day of this dynasty, and it just feels completely different than everyone who came before. But maybe that's not true. I
mean, I think it is and it isn't. Like, I think the ways in which he is different, the most obvious one, to state the obvious, is the Kennedys are an iconically Democrat family. They like defined the Democratic Party for generations. And so regardless of what his personal beliefs are, the betrayal of joining a Republican administration, even if it was a quote unquote respectable one, is major. Like, that is a significant deviation from the norm when it comes to the Kennedy family. So there's that. I think the ways in which he's not as different as you might initially think is the Kennedys have always courted controversy. I mean, when JFK was president, like, he was having affairs while in the White House. He was, sleeping with Marilyn Monroe. There were all these rumors that like Jackie couldn't get pregnant because he had too many STDs. Like Yeah. Think about like what that means for a president that's like in the White House.
And drug use too, right? Wasn't there a ton of drug use in the JFK administration?
So it's like, obviously those are different things. And JFK was arguably a more respectable statesman, but it's not like they were these sort of perfect ideals of politicians and suddenly RFK came along and ruined everything. I think, as I said, like the way I like to think of them is that they're always reflecting the different anxieties of American culture. And I think there's something almost perfect about RFK Jr. like encapsulating these real like fears that Americans have, whether they are, justified or not. I think it's very Kennedy of him to be married to a Hollywood actress. Like that is very common. Like the fact that he's married to Cheryl Hines and that his son dated Taylor Swift, like all of that is very sort of by the book to me.
Very Kennedy.
But yes, I would almost say that like the warping that's happening is due to Trump rather than due to RFK. Like I think Trump has a way of like warping everything around him in his image. Like I think that RFK, I heard this recently. I think the writer Rachel Bedard was talking about it. Like RFK Jr. has always had this obsession with like contamination and purity. And I think when he was an environmental lawyer, that came out in positive ways because he wanted to save the environment from contamination, from pollution, from global warming, from climate change. And that's great. And I think the instinct to be skeptical of pharmaceutical companies is also probably a positive instinct. They are putting like harmful chemicals in our food and we are overprescribed drugs and all this stuff. Of course, at some point he took a left turn. He took it quote unquote too far. And now suddenly we're like talking about how vaccines cause autism or something. So I think his path is a complicated one and it's not as simple as like quote unquote selling out to Trump or something. I think he is genuinely driven by deeply held moral beliefs that I happen to disagree with, but that are genuine. Like they're not as cynical as maybe people think they are.
Yeah, I've definitely felt that way as well.
Yeah. So I don't know, in terms of where that leaves the Kennedys, I have no doubt that at some point he will have a huge falling out with Trump, just like everyone does. And then who knows what his next chapter will be. I've talked to people that think Jack Schlossberg has a future in politics and that'll sort of like bring us back to a Kennedy that we're familiar with. I don't know if I buy it. And I sort of frankly don't want to vote for a Kennedy, even if it's one I find mildly entertaining on Instagram.
It's fine. Let's move on, Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess my final sort of comment is like, I never count them out. Like just because I can't imagine what the next 10, 20 years will look like doesn't mean that there won't be some. I think they come back into fashion like every few years. Yeah. I think the Ryan Murphy show will like make a big impact, whether it's good or bad. I think it'll like increase interest. I think Jack Schlossberg, whether it's politics or whether it's like, I don't know, him getting his own talk show or something will happen where he will like be front and center. I think Patrick Schwarzenegger will continue to be sort of an up and coming actor. I just think, there's things that you don't even think about. Did you know that Eunice Kennedy founded the Special Olympics?
No.
It's like, that's an American institution. Yeah. And an objective good, and that is because of the Kennedys.
Yeah, that is so interesting. Yeah, they have their hands in everything, it seems like. And I think with RFK too, as a final thought, it's very interesting that after being in a family that has so many conspiracy theories about them, and I don't know if that affected him or not, but then that he, came to be such a conspiracy theorist. And it's like, on one hand, I could see the embracing of that having to do with the fact that there are so many unknowns, especially if you're, in your own family, you're going to want to investigate, dig, and that sometimes inevitably leads down a path where suddenly you believe that we shouldn't have vaccines, right? And then on the other hand, it could have gone the other way where it's just a person whose family was plagued by these conspiracy theories. You would maybe think that he wouldn't want to play into that. So it's just it's like a really interesting kind of like crest of what's happening right now. Absolutely. In the context of the Kennedys.
No, the conspiracy, I had never made that connection. You're absolutely right that it's almost like a weird, bizarro response to the trauma of growing up in this family. Obviously I find him to be an incredibly harmful figure, but it is true that, his father was assassinated. His wife committed suicide. He has had a very tragic, a series of tragedies in his life that have shaped the sort of like hardness he has. And I think he's like, all of them are sort of like survivors in this way. So, I would never vote for him, but I do hope he gets the help he needs.
Yeah, I mean, that's the real thing, is that is a man who needs help.
Yes,
most
exactly.
people in this administration, they will not be seeking it anytime soon, unfortunately. But anyway, George, this was really interesting. I learned a lot about something that I should have known a lot about before. So,
oh my God, thank you so much for having me. You know, it's funny, like the way the podcast works is there's a different topic every week and I sort of read about it and then immediately forget. So you really are catching me. It's like I'm looking into my mind memory palace.
Oh, yeah.
And picking up random factoids here and there. So if anything I said was, you know, a few years off or anything, I apologize. But it's a fascinating and endlessly generative topic. So,
yeah,
you know, if you're interested, listen to United States of Kennedy.
Yeah, I mean, what a great idea. And it seems like you'll just never run out of material. So
I know.
That's good too.
I know.
So yeah, thank you so much. And please make sure you check out George's podcast and Straightiolab, which is fantastic.
Oh, yes. I also host a comedy podcast with my friend Sam Taggart called Straightiolab. It is a very different tone. I am a stand-up comedian by training. I don't know if I mentioned this. I'm actually not a journalist. I'm a stand-up comedian, and I do host a comedy podcast called Straightiolab. So yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again. And yeah, we'll just follow this curse, see where it leads.
Thank you.
This was American Hysteria. United States of Kennedy is an iHeart podcast and available on the iHeartRadio app and anywhere you get your podcasts. New episodes every Monday. We are still raising money for the Samir Project, a Palestinian-led mutual aid group on the ground in Gaza, delivering food and supplies to displaced families. All you have to do is go to AmericanHysteria.com and pick up some of our new merch, and all profits will go to the amazing folks at the Samir Project. If you want to support our show and get more of it, you can become a patron or Apple Plus subscriber at patreon.com/American Hysteria or on the Apple Podcast app. Not only will you get ad-free episodes, but you'll get access to Hysteria Home Companion, the other podcast that I make with our producer Miranda, where we tell you stories related to the topics that we cover or stories that we just know that you'll love. And you'll get a hopefully funny look into our personal lives as well. That's patreon.com/American Hysteria or subscribe on Apple Plus. You can follow us on Instagram at American Hysteria Podcast. And if you're feeling generous, you can leave us a 5-star review on whatever app you use. It really helps us out. American Hysteria's producer and editor is Miranda Zickler. Our associate producer is Riley Swedelius Smith. We have editing help this week from AJ McKinley, and I'm your host, Chelsey Weber Smith. Thanks, as always, for listening, and I hope you have as good of a week as is possible right now.